The wind howled down Windfall Ridge like it had a grudge. It screamed through the pines, battering the shutters of the lonely cabin perched on the slope, each gust moaning like the ghosts of the past who refused to rest. The year was 1883, and the Montana Territory held on to winter like a dying man clutches his last breath. Snow draped the land in silence, but inside the cabin, the silence was deeper dash, heavier dot. Henry Coulter sat at the kitchen table, shoulders hunched beneath the weight of more than just his wool coat. The fire in the hearth had died down hours ago, but he hadn't stirred. A clay cup of coffee, long gone cold, rested in his palm like an anchor. He stared into it, not drinking, just remembering. The cabin groaned with age, every board soaked with a history only Henry knew. He used to speak aloud to fill the silence, first to his wife, then to the shadows. But these days, he spoke to no one. His voice was a stranger to his own ears. On the table before him, a charred photograph lay half-curled from fire damage. Only the edge of a woman's smile remained. Her name was Emma, his wife, taken by fever 2 winters ago. She'd gone fast, and yet it had left a scar so deep, Henry sometimes believed she was still dying in the room behind him. He'd buried her himself, just beyond the ridge, under a pine she loved. She used to say the wind told secrets if you listened hard enough. He hated that wind now. A knock at the door snapped him out of his trance. It wasn't the wind. It was. Sharp, deliberate. A second knock followed. Henry rose stiffly, joints cracking, the chair legs scraping across the wooden floor like a scream. He moved with the gait of a man who'd once been strong, but had forgotten the purpose of strength. He reached for the shotgun by the door and cracked it open. Loaded. Good. He opened the door halfway. A woman stood there, young, maybe 30, though the hardship on her face aged her a decade. Her coat was threadbare, soaked through and clung. To her like old regrets. Mud caked her boots and skirts. She was pale, but her eyes were steady. "You Henry Coulter?" she asked. He nodded, but didn't move. "Name's Mary. Mary Walsh. Preacher sent me. Said you needed help." Henry's expression didn't change. He looked her over, noted the cracked skin on her hands, the tremble in her shoulders she tried to hide. "Help," he muttered. "Cleaning, mending. I cook too." "He said you'd pay fair." Henry glanced past her at the storm, swallowing the trees. She wasn't from these parts. No one local would risk traveling Windfall Ridge alone in weather like this. Which meant she was desperate. That made her dangerous. "Don't need help," he said, and began to close the door. "I walked 14 miles, she said quickly, voice taut. "Ain't asking for charity. Just a roof and a warm place to work." That stopped him. He opened the door a little wider. Her eyes were sharp but tired. Not the kind of tired that sleep fixes. The kind that grows in the hollows left by loss. Henry stepped aside without a word. Mary crossed the threshold, dragging in cold air and the smell of wet wool. He closed the door behind her and gestured toward the fire, already beginning to regret the decision. "Firewood's outside. If you want heat, you'll fetch it yourself." She nodded, already pulling off her soaked gloves. Her hands were raw. He pointed to the back room. "You clean. Don't talk unless you have to." Again she nodded. Henry watched her walk into the kitchen. Her steps were cautious, but not hesitant. She moved like someone who'd had doors slammed on her before, but walked through them anyway. By the time Henry returned to his seat, Mary had found the hearth and begun stacking kindling. She struck flint with practiced ease, and soon flames lit the logs, casting flickering light across the room. Henry looked at her again. She wasn't beautiful, not in the way Emma had been, but there was a kind of survival in her that demanded respect. He sat, silent as a stone, while she moved from room to room, sweeping, collecting dishes, clearing cobwebs. She made no comment about the thick dust or the plates crusted with weeks-old food. She worked like someone used to filth internal and external by nightfall. The cabin already felt less like a tomb. Henry didn't offer her food. She didn't ask. She took a crust of hard bread from her bag and ate it by the hearth, then unrolled a blanket near the wall and laid down without ceremony. "You can use the spare room," Henry said, surprising even himself. She looked at him, then at the door, to the room that had been closed for 2 years. No one had stepped inside since Emma died. "You sure?" He didn't answer, just walked off toward his own room and shut the door behind him. The days passed like smoke through the cracks, silent, slow, but not without motion. Mary rose before dawn, worked without complaint, and said almost nothing unless asked. Henry found himself watching her. Not out of suspicion, though that lingered, but out of curiosity. She carried herself like a soldier, returned from a war. No one knew she'd fought. She repaired things he didn't remember were broken. The hinge on the back door, the torn curtain above the wash basin, the stove that hadn't lit properly in months. She even fixed the old music box on the mantel. Henry heard it one afternoon while he was chopping wood. He stopped, axe in hand, and listened as the soft, tinny melody drifted through the open window. It was the song Emma used to hum while baking. Bread? He left the woodpile and walked until he couldn't hear it anymore. That night, Mary stood by the fire, hands wrapped around a tin cup of broth. "You play the box?" he asked, voice scratchy. It was stuck. "Needed oiling," he grunted. "Then Emma used to play it. I haven't heard it in." He trailed off, the sentence unfinished, like most thoughts these days. Mary didn't respond. She sipped her broth and stared into the flames. He watched her from the shadows. "You married?" he asked suddenly. Her grip tightened around the cup. "Was," he nodded. Left it at that dock later that week. A snowstorm slammed the ridge, blinding, heavy. Henry went out to check the livestock, insisted she stay inside. He didn't. Come back by nightfall. The storm raged on. Mary paced the cabin, chewing her lip, then pulled on her coat and boots. She found the old snow sled behind the barn and followed what little trail Henry had left. It took her over an hour to find him, half buried near the creek, unconscious, one leg twisted beneath him. She built a fire right there on the snowbank, rubbed warmth back into his limbs. When he stirred, she pressed water to his lips and whispered, "Don't you die out here, you damn mule." It took another hour to get him on the sled and haul him back. He was feverish by the time she got him to bed. She stayed up all night changing compresses, coaxing broth past his cracked lips. He mumbled in his sleep names, orders, regrets. Once he reached out and grabbed her wrist, crying, "No, Thomas, don't go. It's a trap." Mary sat by his side until dawn, whispering nothing but quiet assurances. When he finally opened his eyes, bleary but alive, he saw her slumped over in the chair beside the bed, fast asleep. He didn't say thank you, but when she awoke and tried to rise, he muttered, "Tea's in the top cabinet. Make some for both of us." That was the first time they shared something besides silence. The storm passed, but the air between them shifted. Henry let her touch the animals now. Let her take the sled into town for supplies. Once he even laughed a dry, raspy sound that startled them both. She never asked what he'd been through. He never asked what she'd lost. But something passed between them, in the way she wiped her hands on her apron before serving him stew, or the way he left his chair angled just slightly toward hers by the fire. One night he came in from chopping. Would to find her sitting on the porch, listening to the wind. "Why'd you really come?" he asked. She didn't turn around. "Because I was drowning." "In what?" In silence. He stood there, the snow melting in his hair. "It's loud, isn't it?" he said. "Only when there's no one left to hear it." They sat in quiet until the moon broke through the clouds dot as the days grew longer. The cabin began to feel less like a grave and more like a home. Mary started planting herbs in the window box. Henry carved a new handle for her broom. Nothing was said, but it was felt. Still, the past has a way of knocking, just when the door feels safe again, Dot, and on the morning the wind carried a sound not of weather or wolves, but hooves. Henry knew the quiet wouldn't last much longer. Not out here, Dot, on Windfall Ridge. Snowfall came heavier in the weeks that followed, burying the world outside in silence, so deep it felt like the land had forgotten the sound of voices. Mary moved through the cabin with routine grace-chopping vegetables, patching torn shirts, drying herbs above the hearth. Henry had grown accustomed to her rhythm. Her presence no longer felt like intrusion, but like a necessary weight against the loneliness. Still, they said little. The quiet between them had taken on a different shape, no longer sharp with distrust, but softened by a reluctant, shared survival. Henry kept mostly to the woodshed, splitting logs with the precision of a man who needed the swing of the axe more than the firewood it produced. Some days, Mary found his gloves frozen to the handle from the cold. She'd thaw them out by the stove without a word. Then the wolves came. It began with a sound in the night low, drawn-out howls that sliced through the forest like a blade. Henry had heard them before, years ago, but not this close. Not circling. He stepped outside that morning to find tracks around the chicken coop, paw prints pressed deep into the snow like warnings. One hen lay torn open, feathers frozen, and a splash of red across the white ground. He squatted beside the carcass, jaw tight. The prints were fresh, still crisp at the edges. The pack had come in the dark, hungry and unafraid. Mary found him. There, rifle already slung across his back. "Wolves?" she asked, her breath puffing out in the cold. He nodded once. "How many?" "More than one. Close enough to smell us." She glanced back toward the cabin. "What do we do?" "We wait. They'll come again. Hungry things always do." That night, Henry sat by the window, rifle across his knees. Mary placed a tin cup of tea by his elbow, then settled into the rocking chair across from him. The flames from the hearth painted her face in soft oranges, but her eyes stayed shadowed. "Where were you going?" he asked suddenly, without looking up. She blinked. When you came here?" She took a breath. "Didn't matter." "Just away." He gave a quiet grunt. "Same?" "For me, except I stopped." She turned toward the window. "Maybe we both did." Sometime after midnight, the howling started again, closer this time. Low growls crept through the timberline like echoes of something ancient. Henry didn't sleep. Neither did Mary. The following morning, they found 2 more chickens gone. The fence had been scratched at, one corner clawed so viciously the wood looked like peeled bark. Mary knelt to examine the damage. "These aren't scared of fire or people," she said, frowning. Double quotes, "No. They're desperate. That makes them stupid. Or bold." Henry looked toward the ridge. "Same thing sometimes." That evening, they set lanterns around the barn and tied up strips of cloth soaked in kerosene. The light might buy them time if the wolves returned. Mary helped gather stones to build a fire pit near the coop. Afterwards, Henry offered her the rifle. "I can't." "Shoot straight," she admitted. He nodded and handed her a hatchet instead. "Then keep them off your throat." She didn't laugh, but her grip on the handle tightened. As the sky deepened into navy, snow began to fall again, fine and steady. The forest went quiet, as if waiting. Mary sat with her back to the barn, hatchet across her lap, scanning the dark. Henry patrolled the edge of the property in slow circles. Hours passed. Then a rustle. Soft, measured. Mary tensed. Henry raised the rifle. Two yellow eyes appeared just beyond the firelight. Then another pair. Then more. 6, maybe 7, weaving between trees like smoke. The largest among them stepped forward, a massive gray with a jagged scar across its snout. Mary whispered, "They're testing us." Henry didn't answer. He waited. A low growl, then a rush. The first wolf lunged for the chicken coop. Henry fired once. The crack echoed like thunder. The wolf dropped, yelping. The others scattered into the trees, vanishing as quickly as they had come. Mary exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. They buried the dead wolf behind the barn. Afterward, Mary stood by the fire, rubbing her arms. "You ever think about leaving?" she asked. "Often. What stops you?" He looked toward the ridge. "What's left to go to?" She said nothing, just turned her face back toward the cabin, where the light glowed faint through frosted glass. The next day, the temperature dropped so low, the door hinges cracked when opened. Henry tried to start the old sled, intending to ride to town for more supplies. But the runners were stuck fast in the frozen mud. "We can't go down the mountain," he muttered. Mary brought out the jerky and potatoes, counting each portion. "With care. We've got 2 weeks if we stretch." Henry leaned against the doorframe, watching her work. "You always this prepared?" "I learned to be." "From who?" "My husband," she said. "He was a planner. Always thinking 5 steps ahead. Didn't help him in the end." Henry didn't press. The pain behind her words was fresh, less like a scar, more like a wound that hadn't clotted. Later that week, just before dawn, a lone figure appeared at the edge of the tree line. Henry spotted him from the window and reached for his rifle. The man didn't move aggressively. He simply stood, waiting, wrapped in furs and mounted on a horse whose breath steamed like a furnace in the cold. Henry stepped outside, gun lowered. "But ready? You've got nerve showing up out here," Henry called out. The man dismounted. "I've got hunger, not nerve," he replied. Henry squinted. The voice was familiar. The face, beneath layers of frost and hair, was even more so. "Eli?" he said. The man nodded. Eli smoke. Half Cheyenne, half ghost, and a man Henry hadn't seen since the war. He'd fought beside Henry's son at Cold Harbor. Rumor had it he'd vanished into the plains after the fighting stopped. "You look like death," Henry muttered. "I've slept beside it for years." Henry gestured toward the cabin. "Come in. Eat. You're scaring the wolves." Eli chuckled. A dry rasp. Inside. Mary stiffened when the stranger entered. She stood with her hand near the blade on the table. Henry noticed. "He's a friend," he said, "or close enough." Eli glanced at Mary. "You his daughter?" "No. Wife?" Mary said nothing. "Cook, cleaner, survivor," Henry supplied. "Same." "As me, then," Eli replied. He sat, tearing into the bread and stew like a man who hadn't seen a meal in days. Mary watched him cautiously, eyes never leaving his face. "Bandits moving north," Eli said between bites. 5, maybe 6. "Armed. Desperate? Ranchers?" Henry asked. "Not anymore. They raid now. Take what they want. Seen their tracks. Close. Might head this way." Mary frowned. "What do they want from us?" "Whatever you can't afford to lose," Eli said. They sat in silence after that, the fire popping gently between them. Mary stayed up that night, watching Eli from the corner of her eye while he slept near the hearth. She whispered to Henry as they readied the door bolts, "You trust him?" "I trust what we went through together." "And that's enough?" Henry stared into the dark for a long time before answering. "It has to be." The following day, the wolves didn't come back. But something about the land felt wrong, too quiet, too still. Henry walked the perimeter with Eli, both men speaking little, but scanning the snow with purpose. They found more tracks human this time, fresh boot prints. Someone had passed nearby. Scouts, Eli muttered. The bandits are watching, waiting. That night, Henry sharpened his old hunting knife, while Mary practiced swinging her hatchet into a log. Eli taught her how to angle the blade so it didn't stick. He corrected her grip without words, guiding her hands once, then stepping back. She said nothing, but her next swing was perfect dot by the second evening. They had barricaded the lower windows and turned over the table to create a makeshift barricade. The cabin looked more like a fort than a home. Henry sat on the porch as dusk fell, rifle across his lap. I spent my whole life building this place, he said. Mary stood beside him, hatchet in hand. And now you're ready to destroy it. If it means keeping what's left alive. She looked at him then, not the broken, grizzled shell she'd met weeks ago, but the man underneath. The one who'd survived war, loss, and bitter cold. A man who, despite all that, had started to care again, and he looked back. We're not alone anymore, she said. He nodded. No, not anymore. Snow began to fall again softly, like ashdot in the distance. The wolves howled again. But this time, it wasn't fear they stirred, it was warning. And somewhere behind them, in the woods now thick with shadow and firelight, men moved with the same hunger as the wolves, drawn by the scent of warmth, of weakness, of life. But what waited for them was not weakness, it was readiness. And in the cabin on Windfall Ridge, 3 souls braced themselves, not just for survival, but for something far more dangerous. Hope. The wind that came down from the north that morning was different. It carried no snow, no cry of wolves, only the heavy quiet that settles before something breaks. Henry stepped onto the porch, boots crunching ice-crusted wood, and stared into the tree line. He had the feeling he used to get on the battlefield, tightness in the chest, a stillness in the bones, as though the land itself was holding its breath. Eli stood near the barn, eyes narrowed against the rising sun, arms folded across his chest. Mary was inside, sharpening the small blade he'd given her 2 nights before, a habit she'd picked up with the seriousness of someone who understood now that survival wasn't a question of luck. It was choice, repetition, will. They're close, Eli said without turning. How close? Close enough that you'll see their breath before you hear their boots. Henry nodded. We hold them off. Eli's mouth twitched, not quite a smile. You still think like a soldier. I buried my son thinking like a farmer. Didn't help. Eli reached down, picked up a handful of cold earth, let it sift through his fingers. This ground doesn't care who you were. No, Henry said, but I do. Inside, Mary stood at the window with the blade in her hand. She watched the 2 men, saw how still they were, like trees that had survived fire and drought and still refused to fall. She'd never expected to feel something here. She came to this cabin to outrun sorrow, not build shelter with it. But now she watched them, one man broken by his past, another scarred by his choices, and she realized she had nowhere else to be. Not anymore. The first shot came just after midday. It didn't hit anything, but it cracked through the trees like a lightning strike. Henry was off the porch in a breath, rifle at his shoulder. Mary dropped to her knees inside, breath held, hands shaking. Eli didn't flinch. Warning shot, he said calmly. Henry scanned the tree line. Or a signal. They came in from the east, 5 of them, dressed in layers of stolen furs and patched wool. Ragged men with hollow eyes and quick hands. They looked like something that had crawled out of winter's stomach, hungry, dirty, angry. The one in front had a red scarf around his neck and a revolver swinging at his side. He moved with the casual arrogance of a man who believed pain was currency, and he had plenty to spend. Henry Coulter. The man shouted. Still holed up like a rat in that old timber box? Henry raised his rifle. Jonas Pike. Jonas smirked. Thought I saw your name on a grave marker in Helena. Must have been wishful thinking. I brought friends, Jonas said, motioning toward the others, all of whom had spread out, surrounding the cabin. Just looking to trade? I don't trade with thieves. That's funny, Jonas said, considering how many lives you stole. Mary appeared beside Henry, blade at her hip, hands steady now. Eli stepped forward, silent. You got 2 choices, Jonas said. Open the door and share the food, maybe a little company, he eyed Mary, or we come in and we take it all. Henry's voice was quiet, but it cut through the air. You already took everything from me? Once, Jonas, don't expect a second try. There was a moment of hush between heartbeats. Then gunfire. The first shot came from Eli. One of the raiders cried out and dropped into the snow. The others scattered, yelling, bullets striking the cabin walls like hail. Mary ducked behind the table, returning fire with the small pistol Henry had given her earlier that morning. Henry picked off a second man near the shed, then dropped to reload. Glass shattered. Smoke thickened. They held the cabin for 10 straight minutes, trading shots, ducking behind overturned furniture. Eli moved, like a wraith, slipping between corners and shadows, his knife gleaming once, then Red Dot Mary ran out of bullets. She pulled her knife and waited by the door, breath coming fast, teeth gritted. Then Jonas kicked it open. He stood in the frame, coat torn, gun aimed. His eyes found Henry instantly. Drop it. Henry froze. Mary stepped forward. Jonas's gun. Turned to her. No, Henry said. Jonas smiled. That's the Henry the first remember. Always protecting someone, even when it costs more than it's worth. Mary didn't move. Back during the war, Jonas said, your orders sent my brother into a slaughter. You remember that? Or did your guilt burn it out of your head? I remember, Henry said. Every face. Then maybe I should return the favor. He raised his gun, but before he could fire, Eli was there. He burst in through the back door, tackled Jonas, and sent them both crashing into the wall. The revolver clattered across the floor. Mary kicked it away. The 2 men grappled punches, elbows, snarls. Jonas was fast, but Eli was meaner. They crashed into the table. Henry stepped forward, aiming the rifle at the tangle of limbs. Move. He barked at Eli. Eli rolled clear. Jonas sat up, leading, reaching for a blade tucked in his boot. Henry stepped closer, pressed the barrel against Jonas's chest. Go on, Jonas spat, eyes wild. Kill me. Ain't like you never killed before. Henry's finger tensed. Jonas laughed bitterly. What's one more? Hell, maybe you'll sleep better. Mary watched, unmoving. Eli wiped blood from his mouth. Henry stared into Jonas's face and saw not a monster, but a man twisted by time and loss, same as himself. For a long frozen second, he saw what he could have become. He lowered the rifle. No, Jonas blinked. What? I said no. Henry stepped back. You're not worth the wait. Jonas surged to his feet, knife in hand. Eli raised his weapon, but Henry held up a hand. Jonas looked at them all, saw the fire in Mary's stance, the fury in Eli's bruised face. The rifle in Henry's hands now pointed back at the ground. He spat blood and stumbled out the door, staggering into the trees. The others didn't follow. One had fled. 2 more lay dead in the snow. It was over. The cabin smelled of smoke and sweat. Shattered glass crunched underfoot. Mary leaned against the wall, heart pounding. Eli sat at the edge of the hearth, head bowed. Henry looked around, as if seeing the room for the first time. He holstered the rifle, then walked over to Mary. "You all right?" She nodded slowly. "You didn't have to spare him," she said. "I didn't," Henry replied. "I spared myself." They buried the dead that evening, simple markers in the frozen earth. No names, just stones. Inside, the cabin was quiet again, not with fear, not with grief, but with something new. That night, Mary stood in the guest room, packing her small bag. "You leaving?" Henry asked from the doorway. She turned. "I think I need to. Not because I'm running anymore, because I know I can stop." He stepped inside, holding something wrapped in cloth. He handed it to her. She opened it to find the music box, polished, repaired, beautiful. "I thought it might help wherever you end up." Her hands shook slightly as she closed the box. "I came here broken," she said, "but you gave me a place to put the pieces. You gave me a reason to start looking for mine." They didn't hug, didn't cry, but when she stepped outside, into the early spring wind, she looked back. "Take care of him," she said to Eli, who stood by the barn. "He doesn't make that easy." "No," she smiled, "but it's worth it." She walked into the forest without another word, leaving only the trail of her footprints in soft snow and the faint music playing behind her as the box sang one last time. Eli came up beside Henry. As he stood on the porch, "She'll be all right," Eli said. "I know. You?" Henry didn't answer right away. The wind on Windfall Ridge had quieted. "I think maybe," he said at last, "for the first time in years, I will be." And inside the cabin that once felt like a tomb, the fire burned bright. Not for warmth, for memory, for survival. And for the second chances no one ever truly expects, but somehow, miraculously, sometimes receive.